Welcome. Good morning. How many of you actually have seen my TED Talk, just so I get a sense in the room? Okay.
We sent it out.
Great. So most of you, I can see the hands up. That's great. Well, we'll build on that, because that was a really short one, right? But really, the focus here is not just about the neuroscience of gender differences, but how do we leverage this to create breakthrough results in our businesses? And that's what we've had a tremendous track record in doing with clients. So we're going to really touch on that. So just a little bit about the 4 themes that clients tend to talk about when they have learned about gender intelligence. One they say that it's made us more effective in how we communicate. Men and women communicate differently. Have you noticed that? Right? And sometimes we misinterpret those differences. Sometimes we blame each other for our differences. Right? Often men will say something like, I feel blamed for breathing sometimes. Right? So there are these communication differences. Also, clients have created breakthrough results in productivity sales, and you're actually going to see some of the stats around that. As COOs, I thought you would find that valuable. And also, really, how do you transform the culture? So they found that not only the teams were more effective, but the culture, the environment, the workplace actually increased morale and level of engagement. And then the removing of bias and barriers. Now, we work, for the most part, with really big companies. It's only in the last 30 years, and only the last 5 years where we're working more with mid to small-sized companies. So we've been able to make impact in pretty large systems like American Express, Deloitte, PwC, and the list goes on, IBM, and so on. But it certainly has been effective in all areas. I should just tell you a story, because I was at Boston Airport, and there was this amazing, statuesque. By the way, I'm Danish, if that's the accent that's in my mouth that comes out. Occasionally words come out a little funny, right? But this amazing, tall basketballer, African-American guy who came beelining for me as I was boarding the flight. He went, Barbara Annis! He had this huge hand, and he shook. He said, Barbara Annis, nice to meet you. I saw you speak at Bentley University 2 years ago for an hour, and it changed my life. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool that something that we don't know about can have that impact, right? And first I thought he was angry at me. I didn't know that the level of passion was like, whoa, right? And he said father, coach, teacher. He also teaches at Harvard University Business School, right? And of course as a boss, right? So it really impacted him greatly. That was fresh off the press. So what does it mean? It's a domino effect to valuing all differences, because we're all different. Would you agree? We have cultural differences, we have ethnic differences, we have gender differences. There's all kinds of diversity in the space, but it really has that domino effect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the business case, and then we'll go into some of the science around the gender differences, and also the challenges that men and women experience working with each other, and how we can resolve that. Would you agree that sometimes there are challenges?
Yes.
Let me ask a couple of questions. How many women have ever tried to change a man? Change a man. Or fix a guy, fix somebody. Yeah?
In high school and college, for sure I did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And how did that work out? Not so much, right? How many men have ever said to a woman, that's not what I said? Right? And she says, oh yeah, I knew what you meant. Right? Those are the gender differences in communication that are often misinterpretation, even though we have the best of intentions. Make sense? All right, so let's look at the values. So 62 global studies have been done that clearly show the following. So these advantages around inclusive leadership and culture. I'm going to give you some client examples that's actually more valuable for you and more robust, so you can actually really access it. Responsible to client and markets. We had recently a financial advisor firm that called us up and said, help. Get this stat, this is amazing. 62% of our female clients fire their financial advisor within 1 year of their spouse passing away. Wow. Interesting? Why would that be? What?
They never bothered to establish a relationship with her.
You got it. Exactly. They lost them at hello. Because men and women as clients want different things. And if we don't know that, we're blind to it, right? So interesting statistics around that. Innovation improved decision making. You can see some studies around MIT that actually says that when you have greater gender balance, you actually innovate better. Minimize risk and cost. We have a client, Deloitte, who was recruiting, and this is a big firm, but it's useful statistic. We're recruiting 65% women accountants in the last 15 years. Yet they had a turnover rate of 27% in the last 4 years versus 10% for men, costing them $240 million a year in turnover. Ouch. What do you think the number one reason they thought women were leaving? Any thoughts?
Schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Who said that? Roman? Yeah, exactly. It was work-life issues, etc., which was absolutely not the case. So when we take you through the quiz, you can actually see what actually is really happening in reality as women. And they fixed it. When they understood, they fixed it in 3 years. They were able to really reduce it. Enhanced safety is a real latest one. We work with NASA as an example, and oil companies. And they've actually, even trucking companies have found that when they have more women, safety increases, which is pretty interesting. So when we talk about the neuroscience, we're going to talk about those safety increases around why that is. And then, of course, superior financial performance. So a little bit here on leadership behavior. So these are the behaviors that are really attributed to really competitive businesses, right, in terms of the behaviors. And you can see that there's a combination here, a complementary combination between what men and women bring to leadership, right? This study, by the way, is done every year, and they measure this, and it consistently shows up as that in 9,000 leaders around the world. 85% of consumer spending is done by women. Did you know that? It's very well known. However, did you know that the satisfaction rate is between 42 and 86%? So number one market, right? And yet the dissatisfaction rate is not that high. Isn't that interesting? So different products, like auto sales. How many women have ever bought a car and you didn't have a good experience and you remember it forever, right? You literally will go in that car and you'll remember that experience because it's connected like that for women. And when women feel valued, women don't buy brands, they join them. So really, how can you really, in your business, value women and value the differences that women aspire to? This is a study around innovative decision making. And again, keep in mind there's over 60 studies done in this area. And you can see here that when you have greater gender balanced teams versus IQ, it actually produces more innovative thinking. And it makes you more prone to listen and more open-minded. How many of you have gender balance in your companies? Great. Okay. How many of you would like to have more? Excellent. Okay. So here's some examples of companies, and I'll just give you a few. This one, telecom services, Ericsson. So Ericsson, his name is Johan Björklund. He was in charge of North American sales, and he had 30 people in his sales team, and he had no women. And he learned about gender intelligence at a keynote in Silicon Valley, and he said, why would I need women in sales? And I said, why don't you try it out? So he tried it out. So he added 10 women, and I said, and measure it for 1 year. Just measure it for 1 year, see what happens. He did. He measured for 1 year. His sales increased from 500 million to 1.4 billion by increasing women. And it also impacted the culture and the level of engagement. Pretty cool in 1 year that you can measure it like that, right? This is another company, this is Nav Canada, if you know that is the #1 aviation company, air traffic control company. By the way, safest, if you travel over the Canadian skies, you are in the safest part of the world. It's the safest way to fly. And they had transformed their culture in 1 year by increasing from 0 to 35% women. From that command and control type of culture to really a much more inclusive culture. What else do I want to say about this? I don't know if you're in the call centers, if any of you work in that area, but that's pretty fascinating. So this is American Express, the credit card services. So they were having issues with collection. More women were complaining about how they were being treated when they were, being phoned to collect money. And their complaints were long, right? So what they did was they embedded gender intelligence and empathy into the script. And look at that, 85% of collection increased just by merely shifting the script in terms of how you do it. So I'm going to ask you to just think about this, and if you can kind of group in triads and just rate yourself in terms of where you see yourself as your company when I take you through this continuum. So this is a continuum we co-invented with IBM, and it basically is where are companies today? When it comes to, if the aim truly is to be an authentic employer of choice for both men and women, right, which we all are aligned with, would you agree? Yeah. Where are we today? So I'm going to take you through it, and then if you can discuss and rate yourself, that would be really useful in terms of how we continue this conversation. So 0 is companies who don't care, have no interest. By the way, Silicon Valley 5 years ago was here. The young companies, Silicon Valley, where they are, was in front of all of them, right? No, we're good, we're at a 5. They actually thought they were a 5. Why? Because they thought, we have diversity. And they do, but it's male diversity, right? So don't care, we have to do this, so it's either forced, government, quotas, whatever is pushing it, pay equity, all kinds of different things that's pushing it. It's a good thing to do, we care, we want both men and women to succeed, boys and girls. This is a business imperative. This just makes business sense. Consumer, I mean, look at the 85% of consumer spending done by women, etc. We're in transition, we've been working at it, but it's not there. We're at a 5. So at your table, take a couple minutes in triads and discuss, where do you see yourself on this continuum? Thank you. All right, so who had 0? Anybody had 0? Congratulations. Anybody had 1? Anybody had 2? Okay, great. 3? 2.5. 2.5? Okay, great. All right. 4? Great. Really good. And 5? Excellent. Now the question is then, the aim is 5, or you're there at 5. How do you measure that? How do you measure that? So we're actually going to send you a handout to give you as a toolkit, a gift in terms of how you can actually measure that. And then you can kind of choose what the success factors are for you. Okay, so that's just a gift for you. All right, so we're going to go a little bit fast here. I'm going a little bit to that. So let's go to gender difference. How many of you, other than the TED Talk, so we'll park that for a moment, have heard, read, learned about gender differences between boys and girls, men and women? Okay, so many of you. Okay, excellent. So a little context, right? So we've done 8,000 workshops around the world, right, around these differences, and we see it appear in every country around the world. It's fascinating to see. And a little context around this, I started in 1985, researching this, 1985. And I started working with these doctors. So I'm still working with these doctors. We're actually doing a documentary series on gender differences and all its aspects, including gay, transgender, all of it, the entire thing. And these doctors are fantastic. You're going to see some of them in tiny little videos talk about their own research, so I think you'll find fascinating how it really applies in your personal and professional life. But this is the kind of the key themes I want to talk about today, because we only have less than an hour. How we relate. Men and women deal with stress differently. Men and women de-stress differently, and often we don't respect that, right? We problem solve, innovate, and communicate differently. So we're going to talk a bit about that. I love this quote. This is one of my most favorite quotes. The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has occurred. How many of you have had that experience? Right? Even in text or email, right? Yeah. So I'm going to attempt to remove the illusion in the gender lens context here. So 1 million people, 30 countries in all continents, this particular research. I've added 2 pieces of research that literally one was 2 weeks old and one is 1 week old, which you're going to see, which will add to this research shortly. Now, we have a bell curve. We are not all men this and all women that. Would you agree? There is a bell curve. However, you know, Larry Cahill is one of the most famous neuroscientists out of UCLA. He says 95% of us are either XX or XY, right, with a 5% of mix. So it is important to look at the common norms between men and women. Would you agree? And not ignore them, right? We talked a lot about soft wiring, rewiring our brain. How many of you have read anything about that? So here's the thing about rewiring the brain. There are certain parts of the brain you cannot rewire. It is hardwired, right? Gender is hardwired in our brain, right? So you can rewire certain things. So imagine this is a building that is hardwired in your brain. You can move furniture around within that building, but you can't actually collapse this. Does that make sense to you? Great. All right, so when do you first think we started to really investigate gender differences in this world of ours? And some of you saw the TED Talk, so you probably already know the answer, but when do you think that was? It wasn't actually since 1990. Can you imagine? Before that, scientists only studied male species and male brains and male bodies. Why? Isn't that fascinating? The assumption was, and they call it other than the bikini factor, the bikini zone, the assumption was that women were more or less more like a smaller version of men. So there wasn't a need for it. And what happened was that you're going to see some research here around scientists talking about this, is that we didn't know that we didn't know, and we were harming women and men in certain contexts, in particular in the area of health and so on. So for example, 72% of heart attacks in women are different than men. Did you know that? So the classic symptom heart attack doesn't occur in 72% of women. They have flu-like symptoms. My daughter-in-law died on the front lawn on a Monday morning at age 38. And she had gone to the hospital that weekend she really felt uncomfortable. Like, it doesn't feel right. Something is wrong. She wasn't a sick person, right? They sent her home, said she had the flu. She walked out of her house to go to work, boom, collapsed. And it was just a gender difference in symptoms. Sad, huh? And crazy. So I'm going to show you videos, and then we're going to discuss it a little bit. We're only showing you two because we don't have much time, but I think it will really give you a sense of what these scientists are talking about and how it plays out. So feel free to take notes, and then we'll discuss about how this all plays out. Interesting so far? Now the question is, what the heck does this mean, right, in our lives, and how can we apply this in our lives, right? Let's really quickly, as you recall in the TED Talk, I asked the women, and they were, I don't know if you picked out how loud they were when they answered this one, but asked it all over the world. So I said, when a man is resting and you ask him, what are you thinking? He says what?
Nothing.
Nothing. Women answer that all over the world. All over the world. And what do we then assume about him when he says nothing?
Lying.
Absolutely. Lying, he's withholding, he's a withholding creep. We got to do something, we got to work on him a little more, right? So watch this. This is the male brain at rest, as you saw. Boys as well, if you have brothers or sons. Really important to respect this. If anything you walk out of, think of this, because we deal with stress all the time. Men need time out. Boys need time out to replenish their testosterone, right? And that is their de-stressor hormone. Women, right? What are you thinking? Women's brain is resting brain is as alive and awake when men are working on problems. That's how awake it is. So women's brain is always on. It's called female rumination. It gets misinterpreted very often because men say, why can't you just shut that off? And we can't. It's impossible to do. So how do we kind of honor those two differences in how we de-stress, right? But often what happens is that we get into conflict, and this is what happens, right? So he takes time out, and I go, wait a minute, I'm not finished with you yet, right? And there, hence the conflict, and it just escalates. That's the frustration that we end up with. Make sense so far? I mean, I know I have 5 sons, and I know when I ask them, how's your day? They'll go, rotten. That's about all the information I get, right? If I didn't know that they actually needed to just be with that for a moment, right? I would say, well, how are you feeling about that rotten day? Do you know what I mean? I would pull things out, right? Versus giving them some space to recuperate. Women need to talk it through, venting, communicating through to increase their oxytocin, which is their de-stress hormone. Is this useful to know? Great. Okay, let's go a little bit back. We'll show one more video and then we'll keep moving. Interesting so far? Does this track in your lives? Right? I mean, that's the key here, right? Is how can we take this back and actually capitalize on that, right? So for example, when you're making this is for the men, when you're making a decision or you're in a difficult situation, ask the women what they notice. Because you'll notice a certain thing, and women will notice this, and that. And I'll explain more what I mean by that, right? And women, if you are in a meeting with men, Ask men what they notice. And you're going to see some very clear line of direction, right? Contextual versus directional, right? And it's the combination of both that you actually make better decisions. And that's what these companies have found, right? All right, so keep going here. So this is a brand new, this just came out, so the resolution isn't that good, so apologies for that. But this is fascinating to me because we've never been able to go into the womb, except for the very first trimester, to do an MRI scan on brains, simply because of the risk factor. But they actually now have new MRI scanner that is totally safe. And they were able to go in and see pregnant mothers in second and third trimester. Look at this. This is the female brain in the womb. This is the male brain in the womb. Isn't that insane? I mean, I've been at this for 30 years, and I saw this last week, and I go, what? Like, it blew my mind, right? So this whole conversation that we have about, oh, it's all culture, right? It's all nurture, goes out the window. Not completely, obviously, but a lot, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been in front of, like with Gloria Steinem on a panel or something, and feminist movement did us a big disservice around gender differences. Huge disservice. And I've been shot many times, not physically, but verbally, just so you know, because I've said that, right? I've always said I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist. I'm about men and women working together, right? So Gloria, for years, didn't like me very much. And I would be on panels with her, and the moderator would say, do women have more empathy than men? And she would go, no, next question. That was it. And then she asked me, do women have more empathy? Actually, yes, they are wired for more empathy. They can read more facial expressions, and it's a good thing, right? And she just was grumping at me, right? But anyway, this kind of takes it in a whole other direction. Would you agree with that? Right? So let's look at how it plays out. So there are no differences between IQ between men and women, or boys and girls, just so you know. But there are these differences. And here's the prefrontal cortex. So how many of you have sisters or daughters? Okay. And how many of you have brothers or sons? Okay, so I have some good news and some bad news. All right? So the good news is this. The prefrontal cortex, which is the youngest part of the brain, is the consequential thinking. So if I jump from here to there or whatever, if I drive at this speed or I take this turn, right, what are the consequences to my behavior, right? It also controls for compulsion, compulsive behavior, right? Boys are more wired for compulsive behavior up until the age, are you ready? So for women, it's about 12 to 14, that's fully developed. Men, 18 to 22, before the prefrontal cortex developed. And that's why there's so much risk. I mean, go online and look at what guys are doing, young men are doing. I mean, it's crazy, right? Ellen DeGeneres is having a party showing all those video clips on her show, right? But it actually moderates social behavior, and that is more wired in women. Amygdala is larger. So this is really important because often we misinterpret men. When men get angry or something, they'll kind of go, oh, you know what I mean by that, right? Men tend to explode, right? And we tend to implode, right? So we internalize it. So this whole danger is men, it's the fight and flight, but for women, it's tend and befriend. And we worked with things that will blow your mind, like in Africa. We worked with war zones in Africa, where we had military men and women together. And the military women were actually able to calm situations. We were with the LAPD, police department. They found that when they have more police officers, they can calm crisis situations. Learning from this neuroscience. Useful so far? Okay. So this is slightly larger in women. This bridges the total emotion. This is the perception of voice. So if you're in different meetings and you're not quite sure what's actually going on for the men, ask women what they notice and listen. They may pick up certain things that are really useful information for you to know, right? Like, is this person buying into this, et cetera, et cetera. This is larger in, or more connected hippocampus. Women, we remember everything, right? By the way, this can be a huge service and a huge disservice, right? Because if we're in a conflict situation and we bring in all the past memories, this is the Me Too movement, by the way. This is totally the Me Too movement. The hippocampus is more connected. Women remember everything. Now, I'm not saying there's bad things about Me Too movement. I mean, women do need to be heard and understood, right? But there's also, it can revisit and reignite. This is the biggest challenge in therapy, by the way. Please listen if you're going that route. When men speak, so they did a study of 9/11 victims of 9/11. That was horrible, right? And they took victims that had either lost someone or were there, right? They had that experience. And they wired up men and women. And as men were sharing it, the more they shared, the less they remembered the emotional content of it. They remembered the details of it. You know, I was at the corner 9:15, blah, 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 in the morning, I was at the corner, this and that. And when women shared, they remembered it as it was alive, living today. So every time they shared it, it became more and more alive. It sent therapy on its head, because that's not really what you want to do, right? You want to complete things. Make sense? This is larger in men, more the propensity for action, physical activity. Men often feel that they communicate by not saying much. And that's often blind for women. How many women have had an intuition and you talk yourself out of it and you said, oh, I knew all along, right? Trust that intuition. How many men have heard women say, I don't have a good feeling about this, right? And you kind of go, what does that have to do with this conversation, right? Right? It's just wired, the intuition is wired, so you may want to probe a little deeper there. We worry more as women. Now let me ask you this, in the workplace, if there's a tendency for women to worry more, this is a question for men, how might you interpret that? And women can answer too. If we tend to worry more, how might that be misinterpreted?
Emotional.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah.
Too emotional would be one. Lacking confidence, right? We have a team in London, England. Her name is Teresa, and she's the office manager. And they kept sending her to courses. Oh God, she's got to build her confidence, you know. She's lacking confidence, right? And they spent thousands and thousands of dollars to get this woman fixed, right? Because she was worrying, right? And she came back and she worried. And then she came back and she worried. And she came back and she worried some more, right? So it didn't work. They couldn't fix her, right? Because part of that was hard wiring, right? When they understood that, and when she understood that is the key, right? She could frame it in a different way. By the way, I'm wired to kind of visit this, right? And I think this might be useful in this situation. You would hear it differently then, right? And this is 2 weeks ago, this study came up with Baron Cohen. 700,000 people analyzed robustly concluded that men have higher propensity for systemizing and women scored higher on empathizing. This is interesting in the Cameron. This is Genius Network Conversation. I'm speaking at Singularity University tomorrow. This is interesting from an AI perspective, because who is building AI, right? And it's all systemizing. Where's the empathizing side of it? And why is it that 72% of engineers leave STEM within 3 to 5 years? So I could go deeper, but we don't have time, but I would love to have that conversation, right? Okay, why is this important to know? Take 2 minutes at your tables, what your thoughts are, and then we'll build from there. Thank you. All right, so let me hear from you, because I did hear a lot of conversations. By the way, women's brains can pick up a lot of conversations at once. Have you noticed that, women? Right? You know, oh, they're saying this and saying, right? Anyway, would you like to share? Why is this important for us to know more about? Let's take a minute or two.
I think the more we know how to respond and understand our people, the better business we're going to have overall.
Yeah.
You know, the one example that you gave, it's easy for somebody to label somebody as lacking confidence or worried more when really they're actually trying to protect our business.
Yeah.
In financial services, that's kind of important.
Yeah. Really great. And you know, I was in Silicon Valley, I was speaking, and I shared this information, and there was mostly CFOs that were there, right? And legal, CFO and head of legal. And they were at round tables, and I heard a woman, when they were debriefing, said, oh, and I thought there was something wrong with me. She said, I actually have had a coach for 5 years who's trying to make me more like a guy, right? So I walked over to her and I said, would you be willing to share that with the entire group? And she wasn't too sure, but she said yes. So she did. And there was 800 people in the room, big room, right? And I said, how many women can relate to that? I didn't count the hands, but I saw a sea of hands. That's something wrong with that. Do you agree with that? Like, we're off here, right? Trying to fit everybody into one sameness mold, right? Thanks for that. Anyone else?
One easy thing that
Yeah.
we do that I think might be helpful, we do a disc assessment on every employee, every person that joins our firm, and
Yeah.
having that understanding of where they are, just female, male, that's great, but
Yeah.
also just personality-wise.
Yeah.
Are they dominant?
Yeah.
Are they an introvert?
Right.
And map
Yeah.
your whole team.
There's nothing more powerful than understanding, right? And having that learning agility to work with diverse people. Yeah. Anyone else?
With my CEO, he's like, oh, we just need to do this.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, oh, we're just gonna go this direction. I'm like, well, hold on a second. I
Yeah.
see like this complexity of spider webs that
Yeah.
builds out from his idea. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
I started asking questions and trying to feel it out so I can figure out where we're taking the spider web, not
Yeah.
just the one idea.
Yeah.
And it comes off as being a naysayer or
Yeah.
being negative, but it's really that I'm trying to feel it out and figure it out so I can make it come to life.
Yeah.
And it's just because that's how we communicate. It's different.
Yeah. So that's another brilliant example. Would you agree? Right? I mean, most CEOs tend to be very, very driven that way, right? And they need diversity of thinking. It's not about great minds think alike. It's about great minds think unalike, right? And how can you have that unalikeness, the gift that you bring in thinking about that more contextually and the potential impact that'll have in other areas? How can we partner and not tolerate our differences, but truly partner, right? Great. Okay. So this is Helen Fisher. I'm actually co-authoring a book with her. Another one, book number 6, but anyway, just so you know. But she said this great. She said, we can have great gender balance and absolutely zero gender intelligence. And often we hear companies saying, oh, we got 2 women. We're good. Good. Check that mark. Check that box, right? And then you look at the women and you go, ooh, I don't think so, right? Their faces aren't exactly expressing that. So think about these slides that I'm going to share with you right now, and think about how you can apply these strengths and differences in your workplace or in your life, period. So here are some tendencies. So these are the tools that I want you to think about, and you're going to get well, it is actually being recorded as well for you, so you can use it in the future. But think about if we took problem solving, and we took these 2 paradigms, and we used both. So back to your point, right, with your CEO. Imagine if you took this, where you're expanding it, where you're seeing the causes, multiple options, seeing a more enduring, lasting solution, and we combine it with the time effect, because CEOs want speed, right? How can you combine that together? And sometimes, depending on the problem, speed and solution is the way to go. Do you know what I mean? And so men tend to use convergent thinking, women tend to use divergent thinking, right? So business schools are actually teaching that today around divergent thinking and convergent thinking. But how can you do that when you're looking at problems saying, do we need to diverge on this one? Or can we just converge? Real quick. Make sense? What actually takes time is the power struggle between these 2, right? Decision making. Think about the fact that you can actually use intuitive decision making and also factual decision making. I mean, that's what happened with Deloitte, right? They couldn't figure out why women were leaving, and they thought it was work-life balance because that's what women said, right? Because women don't want to burn their bridges, right? But the women partners at the firm said, no, I can tell you why. Because they used their intuition, right? And that really made a huge difference. Leadership. Leadership is changing all the time, right? The competency of leadership. But imagine if you could actually combine these 2 leadership styles, you would actually produce better results. And that's what these companies have done. And I don't know, Rachel, have we offered a book for free?
Yes, they're in their bags.
Okay, great. So you will actually have a book called Results at the Top that will really speak to that. And we'll have tons of tools for you. So this is an interactive quiz for you. Gonna see what assumptions we're making in this world of ours around gender. It's been researched at least 10 cross-reference time because we're very robust in what we do in terms of research. So it's basically true or false, A, B, or C. You can shout it out or just think about it. Think about what the answer is. So here's the sources, just so you know. So the first question is, how long do women stay in the paid workforce? These are working women. So women who work in North America, also parts of Europe, how long do they stay in paid workforce, A, B, or C? B. So this is, and it includes part-time, so that might be misleading. It's actually C. So on average, working women stay 34 years versus men 37 years. Doesn't that dispel an assumption for us? That women don't stick around? Give you an example. Women go on maternity leave or parental leave, yeah? Right? 5 consulting firms did a study, and they looked at where the women went after they went on maternity leave. 86% of the women didn't return to their original employer. Get this. But 92% returned to work. But 86% did not go to the employer. So it created an assumption, right, that they went home. Would you agree? But when they dug a little deeper, they actually saw they went to their competitors. Right? Why? Because they didn't feel valued in the process of going off on maternity leave, right? All right. What are the top reasons why women leave? What do you think? It's actually D. However, they say C. So it creates this urban myth that women have work-life balance issues. When women are valued, they will move mountains for you guys. Mountains, right? All right, what about men? Yeah, it's actually A. It might be B too, but that's what they say, right? A. What about conflict? Do you think this is true? Men and women have different emotional needs. I mean, if you leave with anything, this is absolutely true. 100% true. Men seek space, women seek understanding. 2 opposite needs, which I spoke about distressing, right? What about the majority of graduates, women, in North America and Europe, that have been graduating in greater majority since, what, 1980 or the rest of the dates? What do you think? Watch. Isn't that fascinating? It's in the book. All the stats are in the book for you. Again, we can make assumptions, right? And this is happening all over the world, which you will see in the book. Women are there's a tidal wave of women talents out there all over this world of ours. What about this one? Do men who are satisfied as clients, do they make more referrals than women? You might know the answer to that, Andrew.
I would say no.
Yeah. You ready? No. So 2.6 versus 21. That is a big difference, right? Why? Because women talk. Women share, right? So for example, I like really nice cars. That's one of my, I don't know, Achilles heel or whatever, or I should say delight, whatever, right? So I lease these great cars, and I have had this great experience for about 20 years with the same car dealership, right? So I've shared it with everybody. Oh, they're fantastic. A couple of weeks ago, I had a bad experience. I wanted it to be picked up in my house, and they went, no, we can't do that. We're going to charge you this and that, and we're going to, whatever. I was so negative, I went, I'm done with you. And that's it. Done. And now I'm going to be sharing that. 20 years, I'm done. Right? So let's continue. How many men tell of a negative experience? What do you think? 0. Pretty close, right? Yeah. 3 people only if it's relevant to the topic. Right? What about women?
30.
Everybody, 30. Whoever will listen. Yeah. 32, even if it's not relevant to the topic. Right? Now, keep in mind that this happens also in positive experiences, right? All over the world. So when women have positive experiences, they have a great boss. Women, if you have a great boss, don't you tell everybody? And if you have a not great boss? Same thing, right? So really, women can be your culture builders, your reputation builders. Super important to be aware of that, or not, right? Who asks more questions, men or women? It often drives men crazy, but women tend to ask more questions. Now, women will even ask questions when they know the answer, which is, what? Right? Why would you want to do that? Why do we do that, women? Say that again?
To bring it up to the male.
Yeah, to be inclusive, to bring it up, to have a conversation about it, right? Very good. What about this one? Men and women are just sensitive to nonverbal communication. Yeah. Women read the meta message, including the facial expression. So this is going to be a huge weapon for you men to say, what did you notice here? What did you see here? Check, 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 check. Right? Super important. Generationally, pretty interesting stuff here. We're pretty blown away, so we cross-reference it many times, and this is pretty interesting. So what percent of men say they understand women? Watch this. Only 9%. But isn't that cool, though? So we've got a younger generation who actually makes no assumptions and are far more vigil than maybe our baby boomers were. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? But watch the opposite of women. Gets a little challenging, right? So what percent of women really think they got men figured out? What do you think? Yeah, they really do. Right? So there's equal learning for women, right? In here, too. What about this one? So this is the same generation. They both agree we could do a better job at communicating. True. Yeah, it was actually 92% of them. It speaks to something around the younger generation also really wanting some insights and tools in how to be a better communicator, right? In life in general, right? So here are 3 things you can do that I highly recommend you apply leaving here, starting today. So one is, we do this with clients. The number one we do with these clients all the time, don't you think? When we meet a new client, we stand in that person's shoes and we listen, 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 right? In the context of gender, you just use that gear, you will be amazed at how different the wealth of information you can get when we do that and we don't filter it with our own knowledge. Does that make sense so far? And also be interested versus being interesting. I mean, this is an interesting part. So I was at Credit Suisse, now I said the name, so you delete that from the recording. I was in a bank, with a bank, and I was working with the senior leadership, CEO and executives, and we had created this big event for women network, so high financial wealthy women, right? About 600 women. They were about to go into that audience. And the CEO said, I've never been in front of 600 women before in my life, right? What do I do about it, right? And I said, just one thing, be interested versus being interesting, right? So we were leaving, we were going out to these 600 women, and 2 men behind me said, what did she mean by that? And the guy that was head of HR, he said, I know exactly what she meant. Compliment them on their shoes. Yes, that's what they said. Anyway, we did a huddle, that's not what we mean, right? What do you think we mean by be interested versus being interesting? Interested. Active listener, brilliant, yeah, that's really it, right? Right? But often men aren't comfortable, meeting new women, etc., because there's so much stuff going on. Would you agree, men? Right? Especially with the hashtag #MeToo. We've done a new e-learning and a webinar called How to Maintain Great Guy Status Post #MeToo World. And we did it in How to Maintain Great Guy Status Post #MeToo World. Because men are great. Men are great guys. They care. They have the great. There's very few men who are idiots. Do you know what I'm saying? And a few women too, right? Right? For the most of us, we're well. Would you agree? Right? It's just that sometimes we don't know what to do, right? Because of this hypersensitivity that's going on in this world of ours right now, right? So we tested it in Boston. We had 7,200 men sign up in 48 hours. So we knew that we had a solution. So we actually now are offering it in high schools and colleges for free, right? So we can get men re-engaged and not hide out around giving feedback to women, working with women, etc., right? So interested versus, declare your intentions. If you draw a line on a piece of paper, underneath you put intention, and on top you put behavior, right? Often women will look at behavior and they'll misinterpret the intentions. So if you declare intention up front, how many of you have ever received an email and go, okay, what do they want from me? Have you ever got that? Flip your email around if you don't already do it by putting your intentions up front. And then you can provide content. It's super powerful, even in text, whatever it is, right? And of course, this is Albert Einstein. Any fool can think they know. The point is to understand. So we really invite you to understand. So the last piece I have, and I have 3 minutes and 26 seconds to do it, but we have a Q&A as well, is I want to leave you with companies who've done it. So companies who got to a 5. They actually did it. What did they do that worked, right? And you're going to see here many, many different activities that they did. And you could see that certain things like training for women, I don't know why we thought that women needed training. Who made that up? Like, so let's say Harvard Business School, right? You graduate, women graduate as equal numbers, right? And then they go in, they join Goldman Sachs as an example, right? And they go into a 2-year leadership program. Why? And the men just go to work. Like, what? Like, why? Do you know why? They want to fix the women to be more like the men, right? Fix them, right? So here's the heat map around what had most sustainable impact with the correlation to advancing women and becoming an inclusive employer of choice. And the 4 things that were on top of the heat map were these things. And that's in the book that you have. Leadership accountability. And leadership accountability is on behavior, not quotas. Would you agree that leaders set the tone for culture? We're leaders in this room, would you agree? We set the tone for culture all the time. You're on a phone, you set the tone. How you engage, you set the tone. A meeting. How many of you have been in a meeting and somebody runs the meeting and you go, oh my God, that's terrible. I feel completely suppressed right now, right? Setting the tone. We set the tone all the time. If we can be vigilant around that, you can create some pretty amazing results, not only in terms of money, but morale and how we are being with one another in a real authentic way. Gender coaching training, sponsorship, and transform talent management. And I want to sell you or anything. The solutions is in the book in terms of what you can do. No matter if you're a company of 2 or if you're a company of 30, 300, 1,000, whatever it is, you can apply these tools to that. So I would love to engage in questions or any actions, anything you would love to discuss. Any thoughts? Yes?
So I find it interesting when you were talking about relating with the worrying
Yeah.
that you're describing, because I just got a message last night from one of my directors
Yeah.
with all kinds of worry in it.
Yeah.
The first thing in my brain is like, you can do this, like just make a decision, let's go.
Yes.
And
Nice.
I got to figure out how to empower her to be more successful, not just based on my bias.
Right. Isn't that great? Because we've experienced that a lot, right? Where we're just going to just go and do it. Or, I mean, we'll say it nicer, but you know what I mean? But that's the reaction, right? And the other thing about emails suck. Meetings suck too, Cameron, but emails suck too, right? Right? And so I'll say 2 things. Anything that is conflictual, never, ever, ever use email. We have done so many studies on multi-channel communications and the breakdowns it occurs. It'll blow you away of how out of context and misinterpreted it gets, right? So one thing I would do, thank you, as a recommendation is jump on a call. Say, let me know when you have 5 minutes. Because often when women worry, they want to be heard. They want to be heard. I mean, I have a daughter, well, I have several daughters, but my daughter Lauren, she definitely ruminates like that, right? And when I would pick her up at school when I could, and I would drive home and I would listen to her, right? And I so wanted to shorten her suffering. I mean, I so wanted to just say, oh, no, do this, right? Give her advice, right? And she got out of the car and she went, I feel so much better now. That's all she wanted, is to heard and talk it through, right? And it was all gone, right? Yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions? Yes. And then.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll probably try to institute a formalized gender understanding training. We do a PI training twice a year to
Yep.
understand the different dynamics of our teams, personality types and so forth, who's dominant and who's not.
Yep.
But I think I could see us doing that once a year and then supplementing with a gender training, because we're very diverse, but I don't think we've actively went in. We've talked about what we tolerate and what we don't tolerate, but I don't think we've actually equipped our team with any formal training, which I
Right.
think this would be a cool lunch and learn or something like that to
It's great.
replace the gender training.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. Yes.
I was just gonna say, so it's kind of similar. I feel like you might need like to read the book or to have a training or do
Yes.
something like that, but I'm wondering if you have any sort of maybe 2 to 3 or 4 page kind of like guideline on a lot of these bullet points, because
Yep.
we have an onboarding packet for new hires and then independent contractors, and if we could just plug this right in there,
That's
so
great.
that everybody can kind of
Okay.
utilize it.
Yes, and we can provide that for you. Absolutely. And the other thing is we have, oh, well, there you go.
This is in
You-
each of your packets right now.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, see how organized Rachel is on this one? Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I just want to say one thing about what I just did there. Women have breakthroughs through validation.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Right? Women don't have breakthroughs in struggle. Men have breakthroughs in struggle. That's why men love sports and da-da-da-da-da. But the validating, see how Rachel was prepared there, is a validation that is so powerful, right? I was training Ken Chenault, he's the CEO of American Express, he's recently retired. And he said, anyway, I'll shorten it really short. He just asked me for some advice, and I said, validate the women. And he said, but they're already doing a good job, why should I do anything? Right? I told them once, if it changes, I'll let them know. It's not exactly useful, would you agree? So I was in the hallway in the towers in New York at American Express, and I bumped into a woman, and she said, Ken called me. So this is a CEO calling an SVP woman, right? I felt like I won $1 million. And I said, what did he say to you? He said, thank you. That was it, right? So remember this, women and girls have breakthroughs to being validated. Why? Because women spend so much time criticizing themselves like it's no tomorrow. They've already taken care of that. You don't need to do anything about that. You can let that go.
Do you
Yes.
think that holds true for other women validating women? Like, do they feel that same sense of appreciation
Yes.
if it's from a woman?
Yes. It really is about, because remember the worry center, right? Women worry more. So we take care of all that self-criticism all the time. It's in the book, you can read it, right? And so because women tend to internalize and ruminate about things. Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any suggestions for finding a gender balance? I run a company that's like fragrance and candle based.
Yes.
So we have 6 men out of 60 employees.
Yeah.
And I would love to find more of a balance because I think having both,
Yeah.
is very valuable in the business, but it's hard to get men to even be interested in
Yeah.
applying
Yeah.
to our positions.
So so I have so much to say about that, because see, what happens is that when you have a dominant culture, whatever that you're in, that culture is the one that drives it, and it won't attract men, right? I mean, I talked to that with, what was her name, Cynthia, or with Purpuri woman, were you there for that?
I was not at, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she created a company from 0 to $700 million, right? Pretty insane, right? But she said, we do it on feminine principles. And I said, great, how many men do you have? She went, well, right? So she said, we got to get gender intelligence in here, right? So I shared with her L'Oreal and Estee Lauder, who couldn't attract and retain men for their life of them. And what they did was they changed the job description, and they changed the interview process to be gender intelligent so that it resonated for them. So in job description, for example, women pay a lot of attention to the words. So if women say something, Andrew, if you're looking for financial advice, a woman, and you put in, say, must have minimum 5 years, she'll say something like, oh, I have 4.2 years, I'm not going to do it, right? A man will say, I have 2.2 years, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, right? Because men pay attention to the opportunity, women pay attention to the wording. Yes?
Why is it that as a company scales, women tend to be more political with each other and undercutting each other and more cutting with each other?
Yep.
And how do you get them to work better together?
That's great. I want to make sure I answered your, Katisha. It is in the chapter, I think it's chapter 5 or 6 in the book. But also at lunch we can have a conversation too. But it really is about how do you tweak it and be gender intelligent in how you communicate. Even in your marketing material, right? Like Dove Soap, we were with Dove Soap for a few years. I mean, they transformed their business. It's in the book as well, right? Because they had the typical 1% the women who look this way, right? You remember that, right? And now they have Real Women campaign. Their business has gone through the roof, right? And again, when women can resonate that they're talking to me, right? They'll buy all kinds of Dove products, and that's what happened. So yes, I would love to continue that conversation. Over to you. Yes, so part of the hardwiring around women is that we ruminate and we worry, right? And we communicate that out. So we do a lot of work. It's called the 7 Pitfalls for Women Leaders. It's online. We give that free in high schools because women resonate with that. Women can be hard on women. Girls can be hard on girls. And we need to shift that. I'm talking about that in Singularity tomorrow, right, with the Danielle Project, right? We need to shift that. And I remember, I'll just say this, I took over as chair of the Women's Leadership Board at Harvard Kennedy School, and it's a group of women, of the most accomplished, 165 of the most accomplished women around the world, 70% American. And they were nasty to each other. You know, you had the Republicans, you had the Democrats, you had the conservatives. They were all in these little cliques, right? And I went, what am I gonna do? How can I take over this, right? All kind of backstabbing a little bit, you know, those cliques, right? And so I said this, I said, we're committed to closing the gender gap in this world. If we can't show that with each other, we should all go home, pack our bags and go home, right? And I didn't get a single applause, right, for that. But sometimes you gotta be that declarative. And then it changed. And now, if you were to go there, you get hugged. It doesn't matter who you are. You're included, you're valued, you're celebrated, you're appreciated. But it does require a sense of understanding what the cost is when you operate at that level. Cost, C-O-S-T, versus the payoff, right? Which is to be right, right? But what's the cost around that? Now, can men be hard on men? Oh my Lord, right? So there's a human phenomena to it too, right? Right, fair enough? A lot of male bantering that for a lot of men doesn't really work, but they don't say anything about it, right? We have had that experience, haven't we? Yep. And I'm actually engaging in that conversation about how to elevate that. Yeah. Yes, you've had your hand up, David. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, what about like in an organization that's making the transition from like 3 or 4 to a 5?
Yeah.
And the women are disengaged because they've been jaded previously by failed attempts or lack of attempts, and so the men in the organization are like, oh, we really want to do this thing, and but we need you to participate and support, and it's almost like the more we push, the more they're like, no, and so re-engaging them after they've been jaded has been like a huge challenge. So I'm curious if you have any.
I do, yeah. So it's really important to embed gender intelligence for women, right? So this is a pitfall that women can fall into, right? Oh, we tried that, it didn't work out, right? Because it's harder for women to complete things and create a clean slate, right? I'm trying to see if I can guide you to, well, we have an online learning called Be Gender Intelligent certification program. So we can see what we can do in terms of offering some kind of a way that's cost effective for you. But it actually has all of these components into it, including conflict resolution and how to be gender intelligent, how you resolve it. It's much easier for men just to go, I'm good, right? It's harder for women. And one of the things, the number one thing that creates that kind of stuckness is not to be fully heard and understood. So if you could start there, be fully heard, I got it. How can we together reinvent the future so we can avoid that from ever happening again? That would be a really good start. Is that useful? Yeah. Great. How are we doing for time? Okay. Anyone? Yes.
More based around the heart studies. I work in sort of musculoskeletal injuries and rehab.
Yes.
Has there been much study in sort of musculoskeletal?
Absolutely. Oh wow, you're going to be like the global expert on this. So if you give me your card, or however, we're going to send you some podcasts around that, some YouTube stuff from some of these experts, doctors, who talk about that. Sports injury is different. It's just amazing. Even how men and women boys and girls need to stretch differently. Pre-sports is super important. So there's tons of research in that. Yep. Anyone else? Yes.
It's not a weird question, but I'm wondering if you think that depending on the company's goal, whether it's growth or sustaining or anything like that, do you think that the balance between men and women should be different, or should it always be 50-50?
Oh, great question. So balance doesn't mean 50-50,
Great.
right? It really depends on what industry you're in, right? So should there be some form of balance? Of course. Could it be 30, whatever, right? It doesn't really have to. When we talk about balance, we never say 50-50. Now, you did see there are some clients who are aiming for that, which is good, but they're also in an industry where 90% of their consumer market are women and their future growth, right? Here's another, this will be in the book, but for example, I don't know if you're in alcoholic beverages, but beer commercials are a disaster, right? Because women buy the beer for the most part, right? And they'll look and they'll say, shampoo commercial. I mean, there's so many commercials out there. We used to have a process called missing the mark or hitting the mark on gender intelligent ads. And we had got too many clients. It was insane, right? And it was all in the marketing, especially ad agencies, right? The big agencies wanted this big time, right? But no, it's not about balance. It's really about what industry you're in and how can you do it. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like a little advice on just like, what would be the next step to handle a situation I'm dealing with one of my direct reports.
Yeah.
And so she came to me in tears,
Yeah.
crying, and says, I'm overworked, I have too much on my plate. And I tell her, I hear you, I understand, let me take some stuff off your plate. And then about 4 weeks later, she comes to me in tears, and she's like, I don't know why I work here, because you can do everything. Like, I don't even need to be here. And I tried to explain to her, like, 4 weeks ago, you wanted me to take stuff off your plate, and I did that. And
That's
I tried
nice.
to help support you,
Yeah.
and she said, I know, but then now I feel like I don't even need to be here. And I said, okay, no problem, like, I can add some stuff back to your plate, what is it? And
Yeah.
so, at that point, she kind of calmed down.
Yeah.
But then she's had other situations. She keeps having situations that come up.
Yeah.
It waits till it like bubbles up, and
Yeah.
then she comes to me in tears.
Yeah.
About something. I'm like, so what would be the next step? Is it that I need to? Is it that she's not feeling valued? Is it
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
guess I'm-
That's great. Isn't that a great question? Right? Because we all had similar experiences, right? So a couple of things, insights. Number one, men and women express emotion differently. When women cry, it does not mean they're losing it. When men cry, they're losing it. Right? So for women in the workplace, crying is a sign of frustration and anger. Because women tend to implode. Do you know what I mean by internalize it? So she comes to you and goes, da, 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 da. It's frustration and anger, right? The action that you took is absolutely, totally correlated with the male brain. Okay, I'm going to take action on this. I'm going to fix it for her. I'm going to do this, this, and that, right? The intention she wanted was to be valued, heard, and understood, and then collaborate on how can we effectively do this together. What are the things that you love doing, right, that we can get you to do more of? That dialogue, she will feel, my God, guy, he totally heard me. This was absolutely amazing, that kind of thing. Now, keep in mind that there are sometimes we get stuck in victimhood, you know, on different things. And I don't know the situation enough to know that, right? But certainly that would be the action that I would take. I would go back and say, let's revisit this and just make sure that she knows how much you value her, right? And then hear it out and then come up with co-resolution, not resolution from your brain, but both brains. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there different ways to deal with burnout between men and women?
Yes.
People say it's burnout.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you guys do ask great questions. So burnout for men is timeout. Men and boys, when they're burnout, they need timeout. It doesn't have to be a lot of timeout, and it could be whatever. It could be go golfing. It could be sports. It could be, but men and boys need physical movement. They need that kind of, right? Women timeout is through talking. Is through venting, right? And often we don't think that, and we sort of say, let's go and throw a ball or something like that. It doesn't work if you do that with your daughters, if you have daughters, it's not going to have the same effect as if you sat there and said, let's talk. Let's have a conversation, right? So different ways of burnout. And burnout is so pervasive in our world today, so it's something that we really want to nip really fast, right? Yeah. Cameron.
This is more of a Canadian-based question than an American-based question. So in Canada, we now have 12 months maternity leave required by the government if a woman is pregnant or paternity leave. But when the woman is pregnant and has the child, you have to give her 12 months maternity leave, usually paid, full paid for 4 months. Government tops up for 12 months.
Yeah.
And you have to keep the role available for them so that when they return after 12 months, that role is ready.
Right.
It's hard for an entrepreneurial company when you've got 20 employees, 50 employees to hold that role.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a big corporate with 10,000 employees, 5,000 employees, it's kind of easier.
Yeah.
Right? How do we have the discussion with women and with our workforce to try to get them to be communicative to us about their plans to have children without breaching the laws, so that we can plan for that with them?
Yeah.
So because I don't want to bias against hiring smart women in senior roles.
Yeah, that's great. Great question. Yeah.
But if I know that I'm hiring a bunch of 35-year-olds into VP goals that
Right.
are starting to get married, I'm like, holy fuck, they're leaving in 2 years.
Yeah.
It's a,
Yeah.
so how do we approach that?
Yeah. So there is a what's called on-ramp, off-ramp conversation toolkit that you can have around this. And it is politically sensitive around doing that. You can't go over to an interview. Are you planning to have children in the next 2 years? You know, that's not going to work, right? But how can we create a long-term 10-year outlook, like a 10-year vision around this, what it would look like? Because we all want families. Some of us want, some of us don't. And have that kind of loosely defined dialogue around on-ramp, off-ramp. And use stories. Storytelling is super powerful, right? So you say, why am I saying this? Because we had this great woman who was fantastic. Whatever is the real story about it, we'll start the dialogue, right? So you're not that confronting conversation, are you going to have children in 2 years? What the hell am I going to do about that, right?
That's so my second command came to me and she was 6 weeks. She hadn't even told her family.
Right.
And just like she and her husband just knew it. She's like, I want you to let you know something.
Yeah.
I'm pregnant. I'm like, holy shit. She goes, I'm giving you 7 months notice. Like, we're going to work through this. And I'm coming back. I'm like, fuck, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So we did start telling
That's great.
people that. And
Yeah.
it kind of did open up that dialogue.
So that's a beautiful story right there. That's the story. See, storytelling is so powerful because then you shift how you're thinking about it. You go into the legal framework of doing it. You're much more innovative in the approach that you do. That's what I do, yeah. Yes?
One more question?
One more.
That piece, I mean, you talked about intentions before, right? So
Yeah.
can we not have those conversations, inside our organization if it's not an interview process? Like, would it be bad to start being intentional and
No.
wonder, like, actually start opening up those dialogues?
Right. I think it's beautiful if you declare your intention. I mean, if you go back to work and say, I learned something interesting, right? So my intention with you, David, as an example, is to have a real brilliant win-win partnership in this workplace. And if that ever isn't showing up for you, please tell me. Like, I really want to have that dialogue, right? So the concept of this is how can you create a workplace where men and women are working and winning together? I mean, we're in the workplace for that, right? I would absolutely use intentions all the time. I use it all the time. I use it in emails. My intention, blah, blah, blah. Intention, blah, 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 all the time. And then, I think I already asked you this. How many of you have received an email and you have no idea what the intentions are, right? If you got that up front, it would make a huge difference. But in a relationship, declaring it is super powerful. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think about
thank
time.
you, Barbara.